is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Thursday in October. We have hit the second month of the NFL season, and we have hit week 5 of the Ravens season. We are going to preview their game against the Cincinnati Bengals on the road. We're also going to touch on a star wide receiver who has seemingly become available on the trade market and whether he makes sense in Baltimore. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Jonas, before we get into our preview of Ravens Bengals, let's talk about Davante Adams. Let's cut right to the chase here. The star wide receiver that I mentioned off the top, no bones about it. It's Davante, the guy who just came to Baltimore and torched the Ravens and came out of there with a win. Could be available for them to trade for. And we're going to discuss why it could make sense, why it might not make sense, if he's even on their list. But how did we even get here, Jonas? How did we get to a point where one of the best wide receivers in the NFL over the last half dozen years has become a potential trade target?
It was all good just a couple weeks ago, wasn't it, Paul? It seemed like things were somewhat peachy and easy going in Vegas, and then they play the Carolina Panthers and they lose by 2 touchdowns. And Antonio Pierce told reporters afterward that there were some players who made, quote, business decisions. I think after what would come next, which was Davante, I think legitimately tweaking his injury and then becoming listed as a week-to-week type player. I think some people connected to the dots and said that maybe Davante Adams was one of those players who was making business decisions. And then we get over the weekend, Antonio Pierce liking a Sports Illustrated Instagram post, wondering whether Davante had played his last down with the team. I think he's since unlike that. And then we've seen just a dramatic escalation of hostilities, I guess you could say. You know, Davante went on the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams. He was asked about the like. He said he hasn't heard from Antonio Pierce, hasn't talked to him. Hours later, you get reports out of Vegas and ESPN and all the big national networks that Davante is open to being traded, that the Raiders have informed teams that they would consider trading him. And then, you know, you get the kind of winnowing of options of all the teams that you expect to be in consideration for a potential deal like that. You get the Jets, where obviously he could reunite with Aaron Rodgers. You get the New Orleans Saints, where he could again reunite with Derek Carr. And I would advise him, Davante, look how well that last reunion went for you. You obviously got the Ravens, Bills, Steelers, all these teams that I'm sure we're going to talk about who have been mentioned as legitimate possibilities. It seems like the bulk of the national reporting has been that Davante has, you know, kind of set his sights on going to New York to reuniting with the Jets. Obviously, that offense needs some work. The defense seems like it could be in a spot where, you know, he could be a potential guy who could put them over the top, maybe be one of the, you know, teams to beat in the AFC. But I think it's early days right now. I think the fact that he has this hamstring injury that he's still getting over, you know, we still got a month to go basically until that November 5th trade deadline, means that we could be talking about this for the next couple Thursdays, Paul.
Is there just a weird thing with Davante Adams where he just won't play for a quarterback that he's not comfortable with, like that he hasn't had significant experience with? And I know he's got a lot of experience with Derek Carr, but why the heck does Derek Carr's teams, why do they keep showing up on this list? Find a better quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback, but even he's close to washed now. I mean, just find a better quarterback like Lamar Jackson. That would be the case I would make to Davante Adams.
I think at this point, you just get romantic about playing with certain guys. I mean, I think there's obviously like a comfort level of wanting to be with players that you know, with coaches that you know. I think, you know, when he was asked about potentially playing with Lamar on, you know, a podcast before the Ravens got knocked out of the playoffs, he mentioned, you know, that playing with Lamar would be cool, but he also name dropped Keith Williams, who was, you know, his personal wide receivers coach, or I think, and still is his personal wide receivers coach in the offseason. Obviously, he is now with the Saints, so that adds even more of a carrot to potentially going to New Orleans, reuniting with Derek Carr. I guess a certain thing where he's been around the block as many times as he has. He knows what he likes. You only have so many good years left in the NFL, if he even has any good years left. That's, I think, something that's still to be determined. Why not spend it with a quarterback who you know? Why not spend it with a coach that you really like? It's understandable, but I think it's also clear that he wants to play for a potential Super Bowl contender, and I'm not sure at this point, despite how impressive those first 2 weeks for New Orleans were, that they are a legitimate team. You could even say maybe the Jets aren't a legitimate team, considering that they just lost to the Denver Broncos in just a total slot fest.
Just of all the guys to hitch your wagon to, Derek Carr being one of them is just it's certainly a choice that Devontae has made already once in his past, getting traded to the Raiders in the first place. What would it cost for the Ravens to try to get Davante Adams? He's 31 years old, turns 32 on Christmas Eve. He's a Christmas baby. The trade deadline is not for another month. So as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline, the amount of money that Davante Adams is owed goes down, obviously, as he gets game checks at $970,000 per week as the Raiders pay those out. But you're also trading for less time with your team when you get closer and closer to the trade deadline. So I think the incentive is for the Raiders to try to make a deal now so that they not only don't have to pay, but that they can potentially maximize a return. But as you get closer to the deadline, you obviously get teams that are going to be more desperate. He has a $13.5 million paycheck, or I should say salary for this season. And he is due $35.6 million in both 2025 and 2026. And for a guy who is at his age and at the amount of tread that he has on his tires, that is quite a lot of money to be paying, and especially for a competitive team like the Ravens, who are right up against the salary cap.
Yeah, it's tough to figure out where exactly it would work for the Ravens. Obviously, he would be a great fit in Baltimore. It's you kind of can go your entire career as an executive trying to get a guy like Davante Adams on your team. I don't think this is in your prime Davante Adams. I think that's going to be the consideration here. Again, we don't know how serious his hamstring injury is. Diana Rossini for The Athletic said that teams having conversations with the Raiders about Davante have been informed that his hamstring injury is expected to keep him sidelined 1 to 2 weeks. So again, are you going to be trading for a guy who's not even going to suit up for you in the immediate near future? It seems a little bit unlikely. And then there's just a matter of compensation. How much are the Raiders asking for? How much are teams willing to give up? I think the initial, yardstick that Adam Schefter put out there was that the Raiders would like a second round pick and maybe a little bit more in return. Seems like that's unlikely. Keenan Allen, who was traded in March from the Chargers to the Bears, got a 4th round pick. Stephon Diggs was traded in April from the Bills to the Texans. That came out to be basically the value of a 3rd round pick. It seems more likely that is going to be what Davante gets. Maybe you have some, weird elevators in there where it's like Davante, the 3rd round pick becomes a 2nd round pick if he becomes a Pro Bowler, or the 3rd round pick becomes a 2nd round pick if he gets 1,300 yards or something this season. Maybe there's just a certain escalation where that the value of a pick or that 3rd round pick grows if he's on the team next year. That there's just a lot of variables to consider here. Maybe the Raiders take on some of that salary for this year to get a better draft pick from someone. I think obviously the consideration here, the big variable in all this is if you are dealing with a team that you expect to be really, really good this year, then that the value of that 3rd round pick drops precipitously. You would much rather have a 3rd round pick that's in the range of pick 70 than a pick that's close to 100. And if a team like the Raiders expects the Ravens to be potentially a Super Bowl contender, then that's probably excuse me, the value of the pick that they're going to be getting in return. So there's a lot of variables to consider here, a lot of stuff in play. The Ravens do have a lot of picks to offer from that kind of war chest for next year. They have all 7 of their original picks, plus they have 4 projected compensatory picks, 4th rounder, 5th rounder, 2 6th rounders. So they have stuff to play with. But you have to wonder at this point what you'd be getting back in Davante Adams at this point in his career.
I still think there's no question that he would upgrade the Ravens receiver room. The question is just, is it worth the amount of money that you're giving up and the commitment that you're making from a pick standpoint as well to get this guy? Because we saw what he can do just a few weeks ago in Baltimore, what he is still capable of when he had 110 receiving yards, catching 9 of 12 targets and a touchdown, a critical touchdown in the fourth quarter. He is capable of ginning up incredible games. And the Ravens have been connected to these veteran, aging 30, 31, 32-year-old wide receivers over the last few years. Odell Beckham Jr., obviously, who they signed last offseason, played this one season in Baltimore with mixed results. DeAndre Hopkins, the Ravens were connected to quite a lot before he ended up going to the Titans. And now we have Davante Adams. And I predicted before the season, Jonas, when we were just throwing out crazy predictions, that the Ravens would trade for Davante Adams. The fact that the Ravens are not on his short list, I don't think takes them out of the running by any stretch. But obviously, they would probably have to make a stronger push to get him and to convince him to come to Baltimore than the other teams like the Jets and the Saints. I still think that he could add something to this receiving game that they don't have. Zay Flowers, as we've said a million times, is not a prototypical X receiver. He's also off to a slow start. 158 receiving yards over his first 4 games. I think that will pick up. But the Ravens could use just a little bit more in the passing game. They have put up great stats through the first 4 weeks of the season. But having a guy that you can trust to go up and catch 50-50 balls, that doesn't need a whole lot of separation to make great catches, who you can trust down the sideline on these long sideline shots that could be home runs. In games like the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, how critical would it have been if the Ravens had just hit a few of those shots? Lamar Jackson tried, thrown to Rashad Bateman. Those two obviously haven't had the same type of connection in the last couple of years, although it has looked better this season. But having a guy who can go up and get it, who we said, it doesn't have to be somebody that you feed constantly, but having a guy that is going to get the ball when everybody knows he's going to get the ball and he's still able to do it. Watching him in Baltimore when he's playing for the Raiders, you knew that Gardner Minshew was going to be looking his way down the stretch as the Raiders were making their comeback, and he just kept going up and making spectacular catches and beating Marlon Humphrey and beating Brandon Stevens. That guy is an important player, and I still think he could add a lot to this Ravens wide receiving room.
Yeah, no doubt. It's just a matter of if you are trading for him, it's probably there's probably a handshake agreement in place with his agent, with Davante, that you are not just paying for 2024, but you're also keeping him under contract through at least 2025. And I think there would probably have to be some kind of restructure where that 35, $36 million salary comes down. Maybe it's into the 20s. And you're going to have to make that judgment about whether the guy you're paying an extraordinary amount of money for is worth it, at what will be his age 32 season. He has been on a relatively steady decline in terms of production. If you look at these past 4 years, 2020 with Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers, 2.96 yards per route run, elite. 2021, 2.82 yards per route run, still pretty elite. 2022, first season in Vegas with Derek Carr, down to 2.45, great, not elite. 2023, first year with Aiden O'Connell and Jimmy G, dipped under 2 yards per route run, nothing special. And so far with Gardner Minshew, despite that great game against the Ravens, 1.66 yards per route run. That's not great. And even if you say, all right, well, a lot of that is just a product of his circumstances. He's not playing, hasn't been playing with great quarterbacks, hasn't been playing in great offenses. Well, ESPN for the past 2+ years now has their open score metric, which just basically tracks how well receivers are able to separate in coverage. 2022, Davante was 8th among wide receivers in open score. 2023, 16th. So far, down at 20th. And I think that might even be behind like a Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman. I should have double checked that. But this is a young man's position, Paul. Without looking at the outline, do you want to guess how many 31-year-olds or older have gone for 1,000 receiving yards in a season since Lamar entered the league in 2018?
I've already looked at the outline, so I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's right around where I was going to guess.
4. And surprisingly, 3 of them happened last year. DeAndre Hopkins with the Titans, Keenan Allen with the Chargers when they had no one else, and they just force-fed him. Adam Thielen with the Panthers, again, similar situation. No one else worthy of getting a target on that team. And then Julian Edelman, of all players, in 2019 with the Patriots. So I don't want to say that, this is a situation where the Ravens would be better off casting their lot with a first-round pick in 2025 or a second-round pick in 2025 because of just how often you can find really good talent that's much cheaper coming out of the draft. But it does seem like, considering how many mouths there are to feed on this Ravens roster, considering, uh, it seems like this offense is in a really, really good place. I know, beware small sample size, beware the whatever conclusions you want to draw way prematurely from what this Ravens offense has done so far. But you look at DVOA, they are first in the NFL. They lead the NFL in yards per play, and that's been with a 4-game sample size of plays where you're like, man, it sure would have been nice if the Ravens had done this, or it sure would have been nice if the Ravens had done that. So again, I am pro, Lamar getting a receiver like Devontae. He's not any taller than Rashad Bateman, but he does have 20 pounds on him if you just look at their list of playing weights. And I think that would free up, Rashad to be a little bit less of a guy who's locked in to being that X receiver. I think that would obviously have a trickle down effect where you wouldn't have to worry about Zay Flowers getting manhandled in press coverage, which I think has happened over the first 2 years of his career. So I think absolutely it would help this offense, at least in 2024. But you do worry about just how much of an albatross this would be on the team going forward, and perhaps even this year. If it's situations where Lamar and Derrick Henry combined for 35 carries over a 3-game stretch, and you're just left with no targets whatsoever for the breadwinners ostensibly on this in this Ravens receiving core.
Yeah, and you're also adding a player midseason without the benefit of training camp and asking them to gel, and we see how important comfortability is with his quarterback for Devontae Adams is, and to have those guys thrown in a room together in October or early November and are expected to make a playoff push together is just asking a lot. And it doesn't mean that, look, those are two incredibly talented guys. Odds are they'd be able to figure it out, but it does add an element of uncertainty that you wouldn't have if you were acquiring him in the offseason. Let's touch on this game on Sunday, because I think that for the Ravens wide receiving room, I think that they have not had quite as much production as perhaps I thought they would coming into the year, at least through 4 games. We've seen tight ends get a fair amount of targets, although Mark Andrews still is not delivering a whole lot with that. We've seen running backs, especially in their week 4 win over the Buffalo Bills, get quite a lot of targets, as 2 running backs led the way, Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. I think this could be a big game for the wide receivers. I think this could be the first breakout game of the season for Zay Flowers. Ravens going to Cincinnati, 2-2, facing a 1-3 Bengals team Sunday at 1:00, and the Bengals are the home dogs. Ravens are favored by 2.5 points. This is an exciting week for the Ravens injury report, Jonas, because all 52 Ravens on the active roster were practicing on Wednesday. How often does this happen 5 weeks into a season?
Rarely enough that we probably shouldn't say it so loudly, because people will blame us if we say it out loud, because people are superstitious, and I get it. A little bit of a down note. Arthur Maulet came back to practice yesterday. We saw him on the injury report listed with a knee and hamstring as a designation. He was limited in practice, and then just hurried out of practice about 25 minutes ago. Did not see him out there, so I don't know what's going on there. But on the positive side, Rasheen Ali was at practice today. Don't really feel like there's a whole lot of load right now for him as running back 3 on this team, considering just how productive Derrick Henry and Justice Hill have been. But if you can find a home for him, maybe on special teams, he obviously has that great speed. Then that's another arrow in your quiver. So TBD on that. But obviously the Ravens are in pretty good shape health wise.
And Joe Burrow obviously is healthy for the Bengals. 71% completion percentage through his first 4 games, 7 touchdowns, just 1 interception, 6.6 average air yards. Not great. That's 9th worst in the NFL. But Joe Burrow has not been able to get the better of Lamar Jackson in their recent meetings. Just 1-4 against Lamar, and hasn't beaten him head to head since 2021. But this is going to be still a tough game for Zach Orr to script from a defensive standpoint, because Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, both those guys should be on the field. Jamar Chase has 300 yards with 3 touchdowns already. T. Higgins off to a slower start, but he's been battling some stuff. 9 catches for 99 yards, has yet to have a touchdown. Look, it's 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and it's a quarterback who can get them the ball pretty consistently. That's always going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a litmus test game for Zach Orr. It seems like the vibes are a lot better right now in this fan base. A lot of more goodwill towards Zach Orr after how he and that defense basically gave the Dikembe Mutombo finger wag to Josh Allen. R.I.P. to Dikembe.
Rest in peace.
But yeah, but when you look at what Mike Macdonald was able to do to Joe Burrow in his 2 years in Baltimore, it was really impressive. You could say that was part of what was so appealing to him about him as a head coaching candidate. 24 games against non-Ravens opponents over the 2022 and 2023 seasons for Joe Burrow, averaged over 270 passing yards per game, completed almost 80% of his passes, averaged 0.08 EPA per dropback, all very, very solid. In his 5 games against the Ravens defense with Mike Macdonald, including the postseason, averaged less than 200 yards passing, the accuracy down 2 points, and he posted minus 0.06 EPA per dropback. So Mike Macdonald turned Joe Burrow, a guy with a lot of acclaim, a lot of goodwill around the NFL community, into a guy who basically resembled 2023 Josh Dobbs. Extremely impressive, really, really good. You think of how he was able to turn Joe Burrow into a pretzel in that playoff game a couple of years ago when Tyler Huntley was the starter. I don't think that the Ravens or any defensive coordinator would have had a play a game plan as impressive as that one that Mike Macdonald had. Really was able to keep the Ravens in that game single-handedly. But now it's Zach Orr's turn to show that he knows how to fluster Joe Burrow. The plan with Mike Macdonald was to say, we are not too concerned about your running game, but we are still going to find ways to throw pressures at you in creative ways to kind of fluster you, to kind of throw off the protection. And I think certainly we saw a nice range of creepers, of simulated pressures against Josh Allen that were able to gin up pressures without throwing the kitchen sink at Josh Allen and that Buffalo offense. So I think it's going to be interesting. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins have been really, really good when they've been on the field together. It hasn't been a big sample size. You don't want to jump to too big a conclusion and say that they have this thing really humming, but they have been when they've been on the field more productive, more efficient, higher success rate than the best passing offense in the NFL. I think a big part of that has been because they've been able to go against the Commanders in week 3 and then the Panthers in week 4. But still, I think you wonder, who is going to go up against those two guys, because you expect to see, obviously a lot of T. Higgins in the slot. But Jamar Chase is versatile enough, dynamic enough to pretty much punish you anywhere he lines up. And I think it's going to be an interesting, potentially bellwether game for Nate Wiggins and where he is in his development as a rookie, because you don't want that guy to be left there on an island with Jamar Chase, who is extremely tough to drag down in the open field, and then a guy like T. Higgins, who is just a big body guy who can box people out and really make it a long day for a rookie who's definitely on the skinnier side.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the ability of T. Higgins to play in the slot as often as he does. And we've seen a lot of
Jamar
Marlon
Chase.
Humphrey, Jamar Chase, I should say. And we've seen a lot of Marlon Humphrey in the slot so far this season. So do you expect them to use Marlon a little bit more on the outside than they have through the first 4 weeks of the year?
I think so. I think this is a game where definitely having Arthur Mollett healthy and happy would be a nice benefit. Obviously, you can still get away with it because Kyle Hamilton is still a tremendous slot defender. But it's going to be interesting to see how the Bengals roll out there, how the Ravens roll out there. You have to have eyes on Jamar Chase at all times. He is just that dynamic. He is just that special, and that connection with Joe Burrow is pretty much evergreen. So you don't want this to be a game where it feels like every single time down, the Bengals are getting what they want. And, despite that kind of shaky start against New England, this is still an offense. When you look at the advanced stats, fourth in offensive DVOA, passing offense is 11th, rushing offense is third. So this is still a offense that can get theirs when they want.
And the offensive line has done a pretty good job so far in pass protection for Joe Burrow. So the Ravens might have to get creative, like you said, in terms of getting to the quarterback. They're ninth in pass block win rate. They are just 23rd in run block win rate. So maybe if the Ravens are able to make them more one-dimensional, that'll help. But if there is one weak spot through the first 4 weeks of the season on the offensive line, it's first-round pick Amarius Mims, who we both liked coming out of Georgia, and the Bengals were able to scoop him up with the 18th overall pick, so well before the Ravens were on the clock. But Mims is kind of in the starting lineup earlier than Cincinnati probably would have wanted to, because he's replacing Trent Brown, who suffered a season-ending injury in week 3. Marius Mims is very talented, very high ceiling, but right now he's a little bit of a project.
Yeah, you look at the film cut-ups of what he was able to do in week 4, a lot of good reps where you say, man, this is a guy who looks like a potential stud. He was operating a lot against Jadeveon Clowney, actually. So the Ravens have some familiarity with what JD was able to do, and maybe how you can kind of mess with the head of a guy who is as inexperienced as Amarius Mims was. Did not play a whole lot in Georgia. That was always the concern. Maybe more so than the injuries. How NFL ready is this guy going to be? And there were some reps where he just looked utterly dominant against the Panthers, but then some reps where he just got beat like a drum very easily. So I think he is going to be a guy who's obviously going to get better the more that he plays. And the Ravens, I think, are probably going to have some tricks up their sleeve when it comes to beating a guy like that at right tackle. I think the Bengals should feel pretty good about where old friend Orlando Brown Jr. is. He's been one of the best tackles in the NFL so far, but definitely a weak spot at their right side. And we saw Kyle Van Noy getting named AFC Defensive Player of the Month this year. We've seen just how good Adafe Owe can be when he is engaged. We've seen, just how special the Ravens can be when they're sending guys creatively off the slot there to get some of those unmarked pressures. So it's going to be, I think, a pressure point for that Bengals offensive line. How comfortable do they feel leaving Amarius Mims on an island against whoever it is? I think the Ravens can be a really, really impactful defense if they can again find ways to have Amarius Mims in that crosshairs and say, what do you got, big boy? Because this is a really, really important game for the Ravens offensively and defensively.
And on the other side of the ball, Bengals can be had. Their defense certainly came into the season looking like a weakness, and so far it has been that. 22nd overall in DVOA, 27th in points per game allowed, 15th in yards per game allowed. But they have gotten better at limiting explosive plays in the early goings.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember that game against the Ravens in primetime, the Ravens didn't really feel like they had a whole lot of consistent, play-by-play success. It was the big plays. It was the deep shot to Odell. It was that incredibly lucky play from Lamar to whoever it was that ended up with Nelson Aguilar catching that tip pass and just having that incredibly amazing catch that he took for a big touchdown. But they have been really, really good at limiting explosive plays. I think they are third now entering week 5 in explosive play rate. You look at what they did against Cincinnati. Patrick Mahomes, 18 for 25 for about 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So it's going to be interesting to see, is this an offense? Is this a defense that can again put a lid over the Ravens? Can they get them into enough situations where the Ravens maybe have one bad play, two bad plays, and that is enough to keep Cincinnati within touching distance? We know obviously that Trey Hendrickson is still a really, really good player, 17 and a half sacks last year, 3 sacks in 4 games this year, dealing with a stinger. But I think that matchup between him on the over the left side of that Ravens line is going to be primetime stuff. Ronnie Stanley is again looking like a beast. And I think maybe today the most consistent and like the biggest test of his career of this bounce back season, because if he comes out of this smelling like roses again against the guy who's third in pass rush win rate, then how can you feel anything but spectacular about where Ronnie is in this comeback?
And their secondary, despite adding former Ravens safety Geno Stone, is still pretty suspect. They've gotten some good play from cornerback Dax Hill, who's Justice Hill's younger brother, so nice storyline there. But I think they can be had, and especially on the ground, they are vulnerable. What is your prediction for Derrick Henry's final stat line in this game?
What do you think the over under should be this for this one? I mean, I think a lot of it, again, it comes down to game script. If you are in a situation like, if you feel like the Ravens can put the Bengals into a situation where it is just, we know that this is going to be a chokehold type game where the Ravens are up 10-3 at the end of the first quarter, up 20-10 at the end of the second quarter, then I feel like the limit does not exist on what Derrick Henry could do against this run defense. This is a Bengals run defense that, on some of the more basic stats, they seem a little more buttoned up than you would expect, but they are literally the worst run defense in terms of success rate over the past decade. 10 years of data, they have not been good. They somehow were able to make it work against the Commanders, which have a somewhat analogous rushing attack with a very fast quarterback there in Jaden Daniels, a very good run blocking unit. But on the whole, over these 4 games, they have not done a good job of staying behind, of staying in a situation where that run defense is reliable, and that is not good for this Ravens, rushing attack that will again probably have Andrew Voorhees back, because he was practicing Wednesday, he was practicing today, and the Ravens have familiarity with this Bengals front, but the Bengals have familiarity with the Ravens as well. So it's kind of tough to divine what might happen in this game, especially where it's a situation where both teams, I think, know the stakes of this AFC North opener.
And if you were feeling a little bit encouraged by the Ravens' offensive line performance in their win over the Cowboys in Week 3, you had to feel great about their performance without Andrew Voorhees in their dominant win over the Bills. It looks like the pieces are finally coming together, and the Ravens have so far, in the last 2 games at least, found a way to minimize the weaknesses of Daniel Faalele at right guard. They've gotten, like you said, outstanding play from Ronnie Stanley, a true bounce back season for Ronnie Stanley. And Tyler Linderbaum had some rough, plays in the first 2 weeks of the season, and he has looked a lot better, especially in the running game the last couple of weeks. What is your prediction for this game, Jonas? Because you haven't been particularly accurate with these.
At this point, I'm already spiraling, Paul. I don't know where I am. I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like nothing I say is correct. So at this point, I am picking the Bengals to win. I do not feel good about that, but that's what makes this pick such an opportunity for all of our listeners. I have not gotten a pick right since week 1. So I am picking Bengals 28, Ravens 27. I feel like this is a situation where all of the goodwill, all of the good vibes, all the aura that are around this Ravens team could be just thrown away over the course of 3 weird hours in Cincinnati, where Joe Burrow looks like himself again, where that Bengals passing offense is able to pull one over this Ravens passing defense, where Lamar doesn't do enough where the Ravens maybe don't do enough to get Derrick Henry on track. And you just, start looking at the end of that fourth quarter and you're like, kind of weird. The Ravens haven't started pulling away, and bad stuff happens in the fourth quarter in the way that it didn't happen in the fourth quarter against Buffalo. And the Ravens just kind of step in it. And we go back to asking questions about who really is the front runner, who should be the favorite in this AFC North, because this is a big one. This is a situation where the Ravens might have an opportunity to stamp themselves as the favorite in the AFC North if they win this one, regardless of what the Steelers do, regardless of what the Browns do. But I just feel like this is, for me, kind of a bit of a coin flip game.
Yeah, any of these divisional matchups are going to be tough. And for the Ravens to get to 3-2, given that 5-week gauntlet that they were slated with to start the season, and especially starting 0-2, would be a minor miracle. I have them getting over 500 with a win on Sunday. 30-20 is my final score, and I have been much better, Jonas, than you at predicting these. I think this is going to be a big Zay Flowers game. I've been waiting for a big Zay Flowers game through the first 4 weeks of the season, and just one touchdown to his name so far. He had his biggest catch of the year last year in Cincinnati with a 52-yarder, obviously. So I could see him burning this Bengals secondary, and I have the Ravens coming out with a win here.
And if he doesn't, and this Ravens passing core does not do anything, guess what we're talking about next week, bud? Davante Adams.
If he doesn't get traded to the Jets before then. You have great coverage, and you will be in Cincinnati for this game on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Gianna Hahn will have great coverage as well, Kyle Goon as well, and we will have predictions and injury notes and inactives and all that stuff leading up to the game, and then we will be with you after the game sometime Sunday early evening, late afternoon.
Paul, did you actually say your pick, like the actual score?
Yeah, 30-20.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, take off the zeros and it's the record, 3-2. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let's just hope that Sunday's game can give the sports fans of Baltimore a little bit something to be excited about after a rough couple days in the city of Baltimore and at the Oriole Park at Camden Yards across the street from M&T Bank Stadium.
I watched those games for you, Paul. I was there. And I was just reminded of why I don't like baseball, especially when the team that I'm supposed to get behind does absolute jack.
They didn't really make a compelling case to get your attention. I'll be honest; those were not only were they losses, but they looked pretty bad going down at the hands of the Kansas City Royals. We're not here to talk baseball. We're here to talk football. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Like, rate, review, subscribe. Write us a good review on Apple Podcasts. Would very much appreciate that. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer